Hello and welcome back to my channel, Civil War Reports. I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. A few months ago, I took a look at my favorite Civil War general, George B. McClellan. And today, I'm going to take a look at the life and military career of one of my least favorite Civil War generals. And I think the back of this biography I read recently on him really does sum him up and gives you an idea of what you're going to see in this episode. He's described as a problem child all 94 years of his life, a diplomat who insulted Queen Victoria, a Tammany politician so involved with women that he even worried Tammany, a presidential candidate, well, possible candidate, then a killer tried for murder, the general who won, or almost lost, the Battle of Gettysburg, the soldier who laid away his leg in a coffin, the butt of the most vicious abuse in American newspaper history, the millionaire who went broke on women and Wall Street, and the adventurer who was often wrong, often right, but never dull. And the title of this biography, one of the many I used for this episode, really does sum him up. Today we're going to take a look at Sickles the Incredible. So let's take a look at the life of Dan Sickles. Briefly, he was born on October 20th, 1819. Makes him a fellow Libra of mine. Born 3 days after my birthday. Hopefully him and I are vastly different people, though. Came from a pretty affluent family, and he was from New York City. He was a Tammany Hall politician, and he described the days of Tammany Hall when he was there as being pretty rough, with actual fistfights breaking out, sometimes even knives and brass knuckles being used. So he came from a pretty tough background. He was a lifelong Democrat, and he would end up marrying a young lady who he literally met when she was in diapers. She was about 19 years his junior, and from the sketches that I've seen of her, she was a pretty attractive woman. However, despite the fact that he did have the young, pretty bride, Sickles was a known womanizer and had many extramarital affairs. And he was a two-term congressman from New York City prior to the war. And he really, in the 1850s, he was in Congress, and he saw that secession was brewing, and he really was not opposed to secession. But while he was a congressman, his wife, who enjoyed the Washington nightlife but did not enjoy being snubbed by her husband, began an affair of her own with Baron Key, the son of Francis Scott Key, the man who wrote the poem which would later become the Star-Spangled Banner. Well, when Sickles caught wind of this affair, it upset him greatly, and he ended up murdering his wife's lover on the streets of Washington, D.C. in broad daylight, pretty much in front of the White House. Now, James Buchanan was president at the time, and Sickles was arrested, and he was hauled off to jail, and he was tried, but he assembled what would be considered in today's standard a dream team of attorneys that would include future Secretary of War Edwin Stanton and future Irish Brigade Commander Thomas Meagher. And they used successfully, for the first time in American judicial history, the plea of temporary insanity. You see, when Sickles discovered his wife was cheating on him, he went insane and had no choice but to kill her lover. And it took the jury only about 90 minutes to acquit Dan Sickles. However, for his wife, she was, after that, forever banished from the Washington social societies. And Sickles also was looked down upon because he did not divorce his wife over the affair. When the Civil War broke out, again, Sickles was not in favor of fighting against the South. If he felt if the South wanted to leave the Union, okay, so be it, let them go. But the firing on Fort Sumter changed all of that. And as a result, Sickles decided that he had to take action. And one of the things he did before leaving Washington, D.C. to return to New York, where he would raise not just a regiment but a brigade, is he did stop by and see the new president, Abraham Lincoln, a Republican. Sickles was the first Democrat to pay a formal visit to the new Republican president, and Lincoln did not forget that. So Sickles returns to New York, no longer a congressman, served his 2 terms. War is breaking out. He decides, well, he's Sickles, and he doesn't do anything small. He's not going to raise just 1 regiment, which would only make him a colonel. No, he's seeing ambitions of a president, of a general star on his shoulder, and he goes and raises an entire brigade. It would be known as the Excelsior Brigade. And Sickles, well, he knew how to sweet talk people, because his military career, his star rises very quickly for doing very little. He is commissioned a brigadier general in the fall of 1861, but Congress won't give it to him. See, he made some enemies when he was in Congress, and they wouldn't give him his star. So when his brigade goes down onto the Virginia Peninsula with McClellan's army in 1862, the only fighting he originally sees is fighting in Washington to try to get that star on his shoulder. He's not present when his Excelsior Brigade is at the Battle of Williamsburg, but he does arrive on the peninsula, star on shoulder, in time to take part in the Battle of Seven Pines, or Fair Oaks. So Sickles will take part in the 7 days battle. He will be there for Second Bull Run. However, he's part of the 3rd Corps, and the 3rd Corps was left guarding Washington during the Antietam campaign, so he won't be there for that. He will be present at the Battle of Fredericksburg, but his division, he's now in charge of a division, will be held basically in reserve and see very little fighting. In January of 1863, President Lincoln promotes him, or recommends his promotion, to Major General, so he will soon have 2 stars on his shoulder. And with the reorganization of the Army of the Potomac, with the exit of Ambrose Burnside and welcoming in Sickles' friend, Joe Hooker, to the position of Army Command, Sickles will rise up and become the 3rd Corps commander. He will be the only political general in charge of a corps at both the Battle of Chancellorsville and Gettysburg. And it's during this time that Hooker is reorganizing the army that Sickles really makes a reputation for himself. He engages in a lot of the womanizing and other shenanigans, shall we say, that became part of the Army of the Potomac due to the trio of Joe Hooker, his Chief of Staff, Dan Butterfield, and his 3rd Corps commander, Dan Sickles, who again was quite the womanizer. And there were quite a number of ladies going in and out of the camps of the Army of the Potomac prior to the Battle of Chancellorsville. So let's take a look at the Battle of Chancellorsville. Sickles is in charge of the 3rd Corps. It's 3 divisions strong, and he's put in a relatively good position. Let's take a look at Sickles at Chancellorsville. I'm standing on Hazel Grove. This is some high ground here at the Chancellorsville battlefield, and this is an area where part of General Sickles' 3rd Corps was assigned. And I don't know if you can see or not, but in the distance, you might be able to see some cars traveling on the turnpike down there. It was from here, on May 2nd, 1863, that General Sickles observed General Stonewall Jackson's corps marching down that road in what would later become his flanking attack that hit the Union 11th Corps that day. But Sickles is here. He sees the Confederate Army. He notifies his friend Joe Hooker. Hooker is elated. He doesn't think that the Confederates are going to try to flank him. He thinks the Confederates are doing exactly what Hooker planned they would do, and that was retreat. It looks like the Confederate Army is heading south towards their capital of Richmond. Sickles, I have to say, at Chancellorsville, he was fired up. He wanted to do what he felt was the right thing, and he requests permission to attack Jackson's corps as they are appearing to be retreating. And by the time he finally gets permission, he takes one of his divisions. He also takes troops from under the command of General Barlow from the 11th Corps, and he attacks. But it's really too little too late, and what he ends up attacking is the rear guard of Jackson's flanking column. So Jackson ends up hitting the 11th Corps in its flank, in its rear, and causes an incredible amount of panic throughout the Union Army. The next corps in line after the 11th was Sickles' 3rd Corps. And Sickles had control of this high ground, Hazel Grove. But he was ordered off this high ground by his friend, the commanding general, Joe Hooker. And this, in my opinion, has a lot to do with what we're going to see at Gettysburg 2 months later. Because after Sickles abandoned this high ground, the Confederates occupied it and put cannon here, and were able to shell the Union position very effectively. And Sickles did not forget this 2 months later when he was at Gettysburg, and we're going to take a look at that in a few minutes. But keep in mind that Sickles had control of this high ground, which dominated a lot of the battlefield, and he was ordered off by his friend, the commanding general, Joe Hooker. And this concludes part 1 of my biographical sketch of Major General Dan Sickles. Please check back again soon for part 2. Until next time, for Civil War Reports, I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. Thank you for watching.